Well, so normally a fulgari is not embroidered on an embroidery hoop, but because this is an antique fulgari, it was woven so long ago that the warp and the weft of the fabric has sort of blended together over time. And so you sort of need a hoop in order to hold it in place. But usually when you weave fabric, if you've just spun the thread and stuff, it's a lot crisper. Like the fabric hasn't sort of softened over time. So I'm using an embroidery hoop to embroider this today. Usually Fulgari is much larger than this. It's about 3.5 feet by 8 feet. And this is a Fulgari that was cut up into cushion covers and then gifted to me. So you can tell like from the edges being sort of cut, and even this hard crease that sort of won't go away, but also how the embroidery stayed intact in the edges of the pillowcase that were, I would imagine, folded in. I was really interested in how it's worn away over time because the silk floss, which I'm using to embroider it, is unspun. And you can see these pieces of silk and how they sort of start to fray over time. I might have to cut some of this off. And because of the history of Fulgari, it's very hard to learn it from someone. Fulgari is from Punjab, which is a state in modern day India, but the British colonized India. And when they left in 1947, part of what happened is that the state of Punjab got split into two, and they drew like an arbitrary line across the land, and everyone on this side of the line had to go to Pakistan, and everyone on this side had to go to India. So if you were Muslim, you went to Pakistan, and if you were anything else, you went to India. And so there were a lot of people who were displaced because of it. And Fulgari is something that was really tied to the land because people would grow their cotton and like grow their dyes, and it was a very sort of home-based practice. And so the practice kind of stopped overnight during partition. So you'll find a lot of antique Fulgaris that you don't really know the provenance of because those families sort of had to leave all of their belongings behind. And so now people will sort of find them and collect them and sell them, which I'm imagining is where this Fulgari came from. So they would be passed down matrilineally, but I don't have any Fulgaris that were passed down to me because I think they were all lost during the partition. My partner, his great-grandmother wove and embroidered 2 Fulgaris that we have now. But yeah, I've been really interested in this practice and learning this practice. And so one of the things about embroidering it is that when you look at the back, all you see are these dots. And that's because silk has been and is very expensive. And the idea is for the silk to remain all on the front side of the embroidery. So you can see this part that's white that I've embroidered and the back side of it. And that I have these very messy sort of dots of embroidery, but I'm really trying to count the stitches and make these geometric patterns, but also learn from whoever the woman was that embroidered this in the past. For me, it's really learning Fulgari through the textile itself, because it's really hard for that knowledge to be passed down now, especially through the multiple migrations of like West Punjab to East Punjab, and then my family coming to Turtle Island, and then like me being here. So it's kind of learning from the material that you have at hand. And so this process is tied to that. And so my intervention is all of the white embroidery, which is this sort of ivory color, and you can see the floss that I'm using. So this piece would be called a Pachranga bag, and Pach is related to 5, Rang is colors. So it was a Fulgari that was of 5 colors, and Bag means garden. So usually a Fulgari that's fully covered in embroidery is a bag. And bags are usually quite auspicious, and there's a particular bag called the Chand bag, and Chand means moon and garden. And so I'm interested in the Jandbag and how that would be like a very auspicious fulgari that would be given at a wedding or a birth, and the sort of celebratory aspect of it, but then also the duality of like the sort of sorrow or mourning of white within South Asian cultures. So, and how that becomes a part of the textile. And there would have maybe been multiple people embroidering it, because it would be a very social practice, and this is why I'm interested in sort of embroidering with other people rather than just like sitting by myself. But even when I'm embroidering it, I can see the ways in which, like on the back of the textile, the ways in which the stitch sort of it changes in different parts of the textile, and you can imagine that there are different people working on it. So you can see this seam dent here. So what would happen is that because people were weaving these at home, they would have a fairly small loom, and the panels are usually about this wide, and there are 3 panels on a typical fulgari, 3 or 4 panels, and so you can see that this panel was woven to this width and then attached to another panel. And so there's so much planning that would go into it, because on the front, you don't see, like, there's no interruption in the actual pattern of the embroidery usually. And if there is, it's also planned out. So there's a lot of sort of this like meticulous planning that went into the making of the textile, from just the weaving and like the counting of the warp and the weft, and then making these like very geometric patterns. And this particular pattern, it is sometimes called a barfi pattern, and barfi is like a type of Punjabi sweet, and it's usually cut in these diamond shapes. And so even though it's like very geometric and sort of abstract, there are these things that would go from daily life into the patterning of the fulgari. And so not all fulgaris are these geometric patterns. There are a lot of different designs if you look through the sort of different styles of fulgari, and they would be related to the families or the women who are making the textiles. So there are some that are a little bit more figurative. They'll have sort of illustrations of people on them or of jewelry. Sort of later on into the colonial period, you would see people put trains on fulgaris. So it would be these like wishes that people are having for, like their children or grandchildren to travel or to have jewelry, or so they're woven or embroidered into the textile itself. But this sort of pattern of fulgari is very common to the place in West Punjab, which is now Pakistan, that my family's from. So I'm also interested in this particular textile for that reason.
So would you say that these are regional too?
Yeah.
You can tell the region?
Yeah, so you can kind of tell the region. It takes a lot of research to know like where something's from, especially because people don't really make them in this way anymore. You get a lot of machine-made fulgaris nowadays because fulgari are still important in rituals. So even if people don't have these like really meticulous handmade textiles, you'll still have the sort of emblems of the fulgari that are part of Punjabi culture. Yeah, so the different styles are attributed to different regions, but also sometimes because fulgari is also a practice that's not Hindu or Sikh or Muslim, it would be sort of just related to the family. You get sort of like some differences based on maybe what the perceived religious background of the maker would be, because they would add things that are emblematic of their faith-based practice into the fulgari. But it's also a very interesting practice to me in the sense that it crossed sort of those boundaries of faith and the women of all faiths. And with the sort of current political climate of India, it's changed a lot more for religions to be, or spiritual practices to be, very discreet, but people were a lot more mixed and intermingled at the time. And current politics have really played into, and this idea of, like the separation of Pakistan and India, and one being like a Muslim state and one being I'm forgetting the word, but it's supposed to be a multitude of different religions, but it's not really with the rise of right-wing Hindutva movements. And so it's changed a lot, sort of this also having discrete sort of religious practices. And so things like Fulgari that broke those boundaries are also not as prevalent. So my family has a Sikh background, and some of my other work, so I have this work that I've been making that I'm hoping to have a series of, but I took this photo in my partner's grandparents' house, and it has these two images of the Sikh gurus. And I'm really interested in these portraits because you see them in so many diasporic homes. So even if you go to like South Hall or Brampton or Surrey, like all of these places that have like very dense Punjabi Sikh populations, you'll see these portraits like across the world. And so I'm really interested in how this particular image has circulated, and it's because the sort of governing body of Sikhs that was also has these relations to sort of colonial rule and religions having to be discrete, and I also don't think of Sikhism as like an ism, because that's also a very colonial way of, and for me it's much more of a spiritual practice than a quote unquote religion, because that's also a term that the British introduced to us. And so you see those portraits that were commissioned by the governing body being the like first real photorealistic painting of the gurus, and it's also codifying what a Sikh should look like, and that's in a way making Sikhs like more discrete from Hindus or Muslims, and really like creating the Sikh identity that then like perpetuates throughout households. And so with this photo project that I'm doing, I'm interested in like how those portraits are situated within households, but then also like what that intimate space looks like, and what are the other sort of things that inhabit these spaces, and how do they change or not change when you go from house to house. But definitely it's like become much more of a like, you belong to this thing and this is like your space, and it becomes a lot more discreet. And I mean, you can also draw that back to the British sort of divide and conquer. So yeah.
So have you found while you're doing the embroidery, as you practice more and more, have you gotten better, I guess, throughout the process?
Not yet, because it's so well done on the back. It's really hard to read where they started and finished, and also because it's not an entire textile, and it's only a piece. And I think once I'm done this work, I actually found a Fulgari that is incomplete, like a full Fulgari that's incomplete. So I'm interested in like looking at that and seeing like where maybe they started and learning through that textile in that way, and then hopefully completing it in some way, because that's like a real collaboration between this person that's unknown and myself. But it's harder in these pieces that have like really random parts that are missing, because you don't follow the thread all the way through, and it's a lot more sort of I start and then finish and then start and then finish. And you can sort of see that my embroidery is a lot looser there, because you can't get it as taut, versus these bigger patches that are missing. It's a lot sort of easier to follow the thread all the way through and then reverse it back. So you can tell that the parts that are interspersed with the previous embroidery are a little bit looser, and that's because there are all these smaller pieces of thread rather than like a really long piece of thread that's like following through and back and through and back. But I don't know if I'm better at it yet. And also, like, silk is such an interesting medium to work with, because it's so fragile and slippery compared to like a cotton embroidery floss, so it behaves very differently. And I think more than like getting better at it and starting to learn the material a little bit better and how it behaves, which is really interesting, like how different materials, and you really get a sense of like, where these materials come from and their like haptic qualities. but yeah, I also want to, over time, it's really like, at least how I'm thinking about it right now, like a lifelong practice of like, learning how to spin the cotton and like make it into thread and then weave it. So I know how to weave, and I've woven fabric that I'm hoping to embroider as a Fulgari, but it's just so time consuming, and I think it's okay for it to be a slow practice because like the forces of labor and capital extraction make you want to make things fast and like sell things, and for me it's more of just like make it slowly, and then like also to not necessarily like, I think if I ever sold the work, it would be when it's complete, but also to someone who like understood the weight of like the labor and the also like labor of love that goes into making and working on something like this.
And the labor to understand and to learn the process and the material. And I see this as almost like a document too that you're reading.
Yeah, it very much is, because like you really learn a lot from the back of the embroidery, but you have to look at it so closely in order to learn from it, because just like every stitch is so meticulous, and you read it, like you read. It's a different language. It's a visual language, but it is a language. And I've really wanted to find like people who are elders in our community who could teach me it, but it's like people have stopped making Fulgari for so long that a lot of the women who ever made one are in their 80s or 90s, and it's not possible for them to do this kind of detailed work or teach this sort of detailed work. And there are other artists who are really interested in Fulgari. Jagdeep Raina is one of them. So I think there are a lot of us who are from sort of this region ancestrally that are artists that are really thinking about Fulgari and its history and its relationship to our artistic practice. So it's been also nice to be a part of, an artistic community. But that also has taken so long because, like, the arts are something that our community has sort of lost its love for over time, and even becoming an artist is like such a big deal. Like there are so few Punjabi artists, not even just in like Canada but in the world. And so like finding other people who are part of that community both artistically and culturally is such a big like important thing as an artist to me, because it's such a like small community, and a lot of us are also displaced from that context of Punjab, and our families aren't there anymore for a variety of different reasons. And so it's also like traveling the world to find that connection, which is a very like difficult thing but also beautiful thing at times. And so yeah,
finding those networks and connections to cultural resurgency in a way through practice and learning together. That's so beautifully said, and across the board I think also that's happening in so many different nations, and learning through textiles and the form and the material is just incredible to see.
Yeah. And I think these are, especially at this point of the world that we're in with the sort of global climate catastrophe that we're going through, it's really important to think back to these more sustainable ways of living and thinking and working. And these practices are so tied to those things, like a really deep connection to the land and understanding of the land. And it's also like, really hard for me to say that as someone who's a settler on this land, because it's like, in one way I'm disconnected from the land that I'm from, but I'm also like a settler who's in some ways contributing to the extraction from the communities that are from here. And it's like really important for me as a person and as an artist to like understand those complexities and to be aware of them and like to know sort of, my place. But I think that's a kind of continual learning that needs to happen, not just from me, but from like everyone.
And learning, I think, building relationships in diverse communities are so important, and that's how that knowledge transfer happens, through like it builds of relationships. Like these exhibitions, artists start talking, and communities start happening outside their own communities, and I think that's so important to be able to share that knowledge.
It's interesting. So I've done I had a major exhibition that was at the Reach, and so with that exhibition I did a lot of Punjabi media, so like Punjabi radio and Punjabi TV, and it was interesting because one of the things that they would ask me is sort of about like what do I want to say to the community, and one of the things that I really like tried to impress was that we need to go see art, and not just like Punjabi artists, but also like Indigenous artists and Black artists and other artists, and like really understand what's happening in other communities, because art is such a conduit for those knowledges. And I think that's also like making art more important within our community, right?
It's so true, like learning through arts and different textures of knowledge too, because it's not everything can be read or understood by text or talking heads, but through materials, and then connecting with people and making those relationships.